Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Josh Vickers with RTI International's Forensic Technology Center of Excellence, and I will be your technical host and moderator for today's event. Today's webinar is entitled Working with Survivors of Color in Sexual Assault Investigations. We do have a fantastic speaker today. Our subject matter expert is Ms. Teresa Stafford. She is currently the Chief Advocacy Officer at Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. She oversees the agency's 24-hour response to survivors, criminal justice advocacy, Project STAR, and she also administers professional development training across the state and national levels. Ms. Stafford has over 20 years of experience providing direct service to both offenders and victims of crime, with specialization in sexual violence, domestic violence, and families of homicide victims. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this presentation are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect those of the Department of Justice. Any products and manufacturers discussed are presented for informational purposes only and do not constitute product approval or endorsement by the U.S. Department of Justice. And now, without any further ado, we're going to switch everyone's layout now to our presentation, and I would like to hand today's microphone over to Teresa Stafford.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Josh. As you said, I'm Teresa Stafford. I'm the Chief Advocacy Officer with the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We have a lot of information to cover on this topic in a short period of time, so I'm really going to kick in to it right away. But just want to let you know that I've been traveling around the country for the last couple of years, assisting law enforcement officers, rape crisis centers, and other organizations increase their capacity to respond to all survivors in a trauma-informed manner, but also having a conversation with them specifically around survivors of color and how to incorporate an understanding of culture when they're engaging with these individuals. What we know is that survivors from all cultures experience various forms of biases and have very different traumatic responses as they navigate the criminal justice system and the multiple systems post-victimization. However, there are very specific and unique circumstances that impact survivors of colors that we're going to unpack today. So what we're talking about today, we're going to gain a little bit of a better understanding of the prevalence of sexual assault in communities of colors. And then also we're going to talk about some historical trauma that has happened in the past with these communities and the implications for them today. And then from that point, we're going to talk about how we can engage and incorporate in a cultural humility to hopefully at the end of the day help people on that conveyor belt while they're going through the criminal justice system to make sure that they are being believed, that they're being supported, that they're able to access services, and then at the end of the day that communities are also safer with offenders are being held accountable. So I think it's really important that we have a conversation where we can understand these unique needs because what we know is that culturally insensitive, one-size-fits-all investigation, one-size-fits-all advocacy, or even counseling does not necessarily fit the needs for everybody. And we must be able to adapt and adjust our services when needed for these survivors. And in order to do that, professionals really need to have an understanding of historical trauma. When you have an understanding of what historical trauma is, it gives you a better idea that people in these populations as a collective, they may have never experienced these past traumas, but these symptoms and some of the things that their ancestors have experienced still impacts them today. And I really like this quote by Robert Warren when he talks about history cannot give us a program for the future, but it can give us a fuller understanding of ourselves and our common humanity so that we can better face the future. It's like that old saying, you can't go forward without understanding where you have been. And sometimes some of the things that survivors of sexual violence, when they present, people don't really understand why they may not trust the criminal justice system, why they may be hesitant about disclosing and coming forth, or maybe even why they're protective of their perpetrator. And a lot of that has to deal with the history within that culture and why they don't go forward. So today we're going to quickly discuss these historical facts that impact survivors of color and how we can go around them through the understanding and knowledge of them. And when you have a better understanding of these issues within these communities, it'll give you a better understanding and ability to respond to them in a manner where you are actually practicing cultural humility or cultural responsiveness. I know a lot of us many years ago were trained to talk about cultural competency, but I would say we really cannot become competent of a culture that we are not from. And it's really hard to even become competent of a culture when you are from that culture. So we prefer to use the terms cultural humility and cultural responsiveness today. More and more law enforcement agencies and really more organizations that just serve people, period, across the country are starting to allocate resources in this area for diversity training in an attempt to strengthen individuals' cultural awareness, individuals' ability to respond culturally sensitive to people. And a large part of these efforts are really so people can understand the cultural nuances, attitudes, influences, and the behaviors of different races and cultural ethnicities. I've sat with countless survivors that after they engaged with different professionals and just felt that they were being judged because of how they're presenting themselves or not even believed when
all guests have been muted.
Or not being believed, or maybe because their trauma response doesn't look like the trauma response that they expect it to be. And so when we're talking about cultural humility, the hope is that once the connection is made, that cultural humility will be understood. It is an ongoing process by which individuals and systems respond respectfully and effectively to all individuals. It is an ongoing process. When I talked a few seconds ago about how some of us might have been trained under the old model of being cultural competent, it's like once you got to cultural competent, people felt that they had all the information they needed from that culture, and there's a stop, it's a period after that. But cultural humility is really the ongoing process where we are continuously learning how we can identify, respect, and engage with individuals that may be different from us. So when we put it into practice, it's really 4 things that we need to think about. Respect for others regardless of the differences in their cultural background, and communicating in a way where individuals do not feel they're being spoken down to or demeaned, and then understanding how one's life experiences may impact their trauma response or how they present, and then engaging with individuals and engaging with communities outside of your norm on a daily basis. We are so quick to, I believe, be a little bit more proactive instead of reactive with populations, and that's basically showing up sometimes in these communities before anything happens. It's really hard to build relationships with entities after something has happened when you typically don't have a relationship with them at all, and it's kind of hard to get to that part of communication, respect, and understanding. So when we put it into practice for cultural humility, it's really demonstrating it. Trust is established, and once trust is established, more victims are likely to report and stay engaged. And if more victims are reporting and staying engaged, at the end of the day, we get to increase offender accountability, and we also get to communities feeling safer and less victimization taking place. So as we're about to transition over into really talking about what the past is for some of these communities of colors, what we know that sexual violence has historically been used as a tool or a weapon of domination in communities of color. The impact of sexual violence on different communities can be understood by looking at these unique challenges and the history that they have often faced. Communities of color often face multiple barriers when dealing with the aftermath of sexual violence. I really like Kimberly Crenshaw. She talked about the imposition of one burden interacting with the pre-existing vulnerabilities to create yet another dimension of disempowerment. And what she's really speaking to is the multiple layers of trauma that certain communities have experienced over years, and how that trauma really shows up and attacks some survivors from these populations when they disclose. And what it typically has created historically is a silence of sexual violence for survivors of color. And some of that silence actually has been used as a tool of survival for some survivors. Staying silent has been able to not only protect them, but also to protect their families. And we're going to start off talking about Native American survivors. While we know that there is approximately 17,000 rape crisis centers in the United States, there are less than 5 rape crisis center programs that specifically cater to the needs of the Native American community. And because of that, there can be extreme reporting, extreme underreporting, and also a lack of knowledge about what resources are out here and available to individuals. What's unique about Native American survivors from other survivors of color and other survivors of sexual violence, period, is that the mass majority of these survivors are assaulted by someone who is non-Native American. And that's quite different. And because of that, history with regards to colonization for Native Americans, it's really, sometimes they don't know who to report to. There's a fear of reporting. And also, with the United States prosecutors declining to prosecute over 67% of abuse and homicides that take place against Native American women, there can be this perception that nobody is going to be held accountable for the actions and the victimizations that these individuals may experience. One of the other things that we know with regards to Native American survivors, a lot of them, if you go back to the history, Native American children, they were forced into boarding schools, and a lot of them were sexually abused. And what we see is that adults who have been victimized also have typically been victimized as children. And when you think about that, I don't know for you all, but for when I first entered the field of sexual violence many, many years ago, you know, when you have a survivor in front of you who was sexually assaulted, and then they say, oh, yeah, I was sexually assaulted back when I was a kid. I was sexually assaulted then. Sometimes people start to question whether they are actually assaulted or not. But just keep in mind that a lot of times people who were abused as children, they're typically abused again as an adult. And that's a very unfortunate circumstance when it comes to individuals who have experienced sexual violence once. Some key considerations that you can have in mind when you're dealing with survivors of Native American survivors is just think about, because of the history that they have experienced within their culture, that sexual assault can be seen as not only an attack against that individual, but as an attack against the community as a whole. And also think about the power dynamics. Unfortunately, typically, we know that our system, our criminal justice system, is not a very extreme diverse criminal justice system, depending on which community. And if we also know that majority of the individuals are sexually assaulted by non-Native individuals, who's the police that's showing up for these individuals? Do the police officers look like them? Are they from their culture? The prosecutors, the judges, the people who are to hold the perpetrators accountable typically look like the perpetrators. So that right there in and of itself could create a power dynamic and a mistrust of the system. But working around that is really identifying who the gatekeepers are in the community, who's providing services to individuals in the communities, and also connecting these individuals and building a relationship with them so you can start building that trust, so people say, hey, I may not be able to provide everything for you, but I actually know this is somebody that we can trust who can provide the services for you. And also allow them the ability to bring a trusted person with them for the meetings, for the interviews, and also just be in there with them so they don't have to go through this process alone because of those power dynamics that's in play. And then when you're talking about our Hispanic Latina survivors, what we know for this individuals that we see a lot. It's been my experience that I've also seen a lot of survivors from this population are sexually assaulted within their relationships. Especially, I've had numerous ladies that were married or were dating, and their pastors informed them when they went to the church, and told them, oh, you have to marry your perpetrator. You must stay in this relationship, which is really for them, it's really sad that they're being told this by people that they look up to, that they worship. And the other thing about some of the Latino women that I have worked with, they have been criticized for stepping outside of the church and going out to seek help or outside of their family. And so one of the things that you can work with that is to make sure privacy. Privacy is important for all survivors, but what we know and what we've seen for some of our Hispanic survivors, that privacy is even more important because we don't want people to be pushed away from their churches, kicked out of their families, and being left without some of the support systems that have been in place for them. The other thing historically about Hispanic women, if you go back to the 1900s, the high number of women who were forced into sterilization, and I think this is really important for us to acknowledge and understand, because if we're looking for people to go have forensic medical exams complete within a timely fashion or to seek any type of medical treatment post-victimization, there can be a hesitancy to trust the healthcare system because of some of the past things that have happened to women being forced into sterilization. So one of the things that you can do is working around that is really explaining the process and why having a forensic exam is important for individuals. Also, always see if you have advocates, connect them to advocacy agencies where they can have that supportive person there as well that can help them through that process. Other things to consider when working with Hispanic survivors is the language barriers. If you don't often use family or friends to translate, I will also say that I have used, I've had a case in the past where I was speaking with a young lady who was sexually assaulted and she was beat up by her brother. We were at the grand jury process and family members were there telling her not to speak to me, and they were translating for the detective, but that lo and behold, they didn't know that the advocate that I was training in that moment, she spoke Spanish, she was bilingual, and she was able to just tell me what the family was saying. It's really important to make sure that you're using translators for any population that needs translators, to make sure you're using professional translators who understand trauma and also who are able to communicate in a manner in which the individuals are able to disclose the information needed. And I think it's really important that we also talk about the immigration issues that's present for Black and brown survivors or Black and brown individuals, period. Even though these survivors may be here legally, but they may have somebody that's connected to them that through the investigation you might find out their immigration status is not appropriate or their immigration status is illegal. One of the things that we must do is be aware of that factor in and of itself. Through our program here at the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, we have the Hogar Consuelo program, and we let people know that they can access us, our services, without necessarily having to go to the police. They can come talk to us so we can talk to them about the steps, but it's be really mindful that sometimes people don't come forward because they have a severe fear of being deported right now. And then for our Asian Pacific Islander survivors, within traditional Asian families, there may be a value placed on suffering without complaint. There may be pressure to keep the information about the assault within the family and not seek outside sources. When we're thinking about various populations of survivors of color, this is one of the groups where they have an extreme low reporting rate compared to other survivors of color. Unfortunately, Asian women are stereotyped as being docile and seen as very easy targets for sexual violence. And some of these stereotypes prompt people to blame them for their victimization and for not sticking up for themselves. Their violence is often understood as a result of their perceived submission and passive attitudes. And I think that's really important to keep in mind when we are engaging with survivors from this group, just thinking that they might not be able to come forward as quickly, that the shame that they carry with themselves and the honor to the culture may impact the investigation. And this is not the same as saying that they are to blame for what happened to them at all, because survivors of sexual violence, regardless of who they are, should never be blamed for their victimization, but that shame that they carry with them may be a little bit more than some others. And then the risk of social isolation. We see this, I think, across the board from all survivors of color. There's a huge risk of being isolated that if you go forward and tell or bring other individuals into our community, or even bring other individuals tell the people from our community that they can be isolated from the larger community that has been protecting them. And then within the Asian community, there's also hierarchical structures that need to be identified and also understood with regards to when people engage with outside individuals. And when we're talking about African American survivors, what we know from the Black Woman's Blueprint is that 60% may experience a sexual violence before the age of 18. I think what's unique about this, that if we were talking about any other type of health epidemic or maybe a population from the more of the dominant culture, that there would be a completely different response in how society would be tackling this issue in and of itself. African American women have been historically experienced sexual violence, sort of like our Native American woman as a domination of control of that population. You know, you have slavery, where there were reproduction plantations just to force people to have sex with each other, to make more slaves. And then you have to deal with the interracial rapes that were taking place where there was no accountability. And then when you move over into the Jim Crow era, the gang rapes of women, Black women during that time period were overshadowed by the lynching of the Black men. So those women were often forced to keep silent for the fear of the men that was closely connected to them would lose their lives. Some key considerations for when working with African American or Black survivors is think about the culture of silence and why it was created. Many people assume that this culture of silence was created as a no-snitch rule, but we don't talk to police, but really it goes back to slavery time, that into the Jim Crow era, is that what happens in our home stays in our home for the fear of people's lives within that home. That has trickled down many, many generations. And then the interracial dynamics of we protect our men at all costs. We don't want to engage them into the system, which is already filled with Black men, whether it was just or unjust. And then also there's a lot of times we need to avoid the stereotyping that Black women specifically experience because of slavery. And we're going to talk about a little bit of those stereotypes in just a second. Oh, next slide. The stereotypes. When we think about some of the stereotypes that we see, these stereotypes were created to justify the objectification of women of color. They basically shifted the blame for institutions that have created the discrimination and put the blame on the individual versus that on the person who actually did the perpetration. And then the other thing that these stereotypes do for women of color, it deepens the roots of the internalized oppression and oppression, period. And what we know is that sometimes these stereotypes that are out here, that women of color are over-sexual, they are aggressive, and also the stereotypes about men, that they are of the Black men, that they are over-sexualized. All of these different stereotypes actually shifts the blame and then makes a willing participant in the eyes of the individuals who are using these stereotypes to justify the victimization of these individuals. And, you know, I talked just briefly, the stereotypes and how they affect men of color. They're actually seen as sexual predators to justify the overcriminalization of men of color. They are less likely to be believed when they are victims. I have had a case, I'll never forget this case I worked about 6 years ago. It was a young man who was 16 years old. He was sexually assaulted over the holiday weekend, actually Thanksgiving weekend, by Anna kids who came in from out of town. And when the detective who was working the case, he just couldn't believe that this young man, he believed that the incident happened, but he could not believe that it was a rape. He believed that this young man willingly wanted to have sex with his older aunt, and said, you know, he's a male, he's a basketball player, he's athletic. He just had all of these adjectives that he was using to describe him, nothing to the fact that this was a child who was taken advantage of by an adult. And so sometimes they're just less likely to be believed when they come forward because of this stereotype of the hypersexuality that they have. Survivors of color are less likely to report to police. I mean, we are living in a society where we're seeing constantly videos over and over again on social media of police brutality with people of color. And sometimes people are really hesitant to call the police due to that fact alone. They want the assault to stop. They want the person to be held accountable. But there's a fear that they don't want this person to receive any other brutality as an outside of that. And then I talked about that protecting the men from the racial backlash. We see this a lot also on college campuses, where, especially on predominantly white institutions, where you have small pockets of people of color, and if that person is survivor is sexually assaulted by another person of color, and then they tell, they're going to have some backlash from that community a lot of times, because it's like, hey, he made it to college. We don't tell on each other, and now it brings attention, especially more attention, to that small population. We also see the same thing on historically black colleges, where the reporting for sexual violence on those college campuses are extremely low because of the same thing. It's like we protect our men at all costs. And that goes back to the Jim Crow days with the lynching and the sexual assault. It's the same thing. History is kind of repeating itself over and over again. So with some of that, I want to just take a pause from you all and ask, what do you think are some of the implications today that you might see with regards to survivors coming forward and reporting? I see somebody said the deportation fears. Yes, the ongoing, you're absolutely right, Charlene, the ongoing jurisdictional issues between tribal communities and non-tribal law enforcement. I think one of the things is that on the tribal communities, there is a lot of times a confusion of who has jurisdiction. Where do I report? Who's going to hold the person accountable? The mistrust of the system, yes. And having to talk about it again. And not seeing people in the organization who look like them, the diversity or the lack of diversity within organizations. The fear of just not being believed. That's the number one fear, I think, for all survivors, is the extreme fear of not being believed when they come forward and report a victimization. But sometimes that fear may increase a little bit more for certain populations of individuals. Language barriers is huge, especially if you're depending on which language you're talking about, because some languages, there's not even the appropriate words to talk about sexual assault or to describe a sexual assault. So if you are speaking a language that you don't have the words to describe it, it's really hard to even disclose something when you don't have the words to help you disclose it. These are all really great. Thank you. Some other things, some of the things that we're seeing, the untested backlog of rape hits across the country. what we're seeing, I know these three communities I have up here on the screen, Detroit, Memphis, and Cleveland, they're heavily populated with African Americans, but what we're seeing is that majority of these kids, and this is from a lot of the places and other areas that I've worked with, that the majority of these untested rape kids that belong to women of color. And the thing about it is, it wasn't that these kids just didn't get tested. These cases never were investigated. In Cleveland, we did some research and found that some of our cases were closed within 24, 48 hours of the individual making a report, and there's no follow-up or none added. Detroit, if you were able to had an opportunity to watch the screening I Am Evidence, I really say it's a great movie for you all to watch to get an understanding of what's going on with the untested backlog kids across the country. But there was one case that was highlighted in there where the lady was basically told that, you're going to have to wait your turn. It's going to be years before I can even get to investigating this case. And when a survivor comes forward to say that they want to disclose, when a survivor comes forward and say, hey, I'm ready to report, I would like something to happen with this case, and to be told it's going to take me years to even get to your report, that in and of itself can discourage that person from coming forward or continue staying engaged in this process. And what that does, that individual may go back into the community and say, hey, this happened to me, but I didn't get the response. I was told I have to wait a couple years. So if other people hear that, because communities that are small, word of mouth is huge. And when that happens, that have other survivors, they may not come forward to report or discuss information about what happened to them. The name of the movie that I was referencing is I Am Evidence. It's probably on Netflix right now because it was on HBO earlier this year. Another implication is the historical trauma. The Department of Justice went into the Baltimore Police Department to investigate some allegations of police brutality. And not talking about the police brutality in and of itself, but what they found was they stumbled upon that the detectives were not investigating sexual assault cases, that there was some gender bias stuff going on there, especially with the reporting of women reporting sexual assault and with trans individuals. And this is a community who was predominantly people of color that was impacted in this investigation. Another thing is what we're seeing is the Girlhood Interrupted. It is a report that was created by the Georgetown Law School of Poverty. This report really was very interesting because what this report showed was that they did a report of individuals from various backgrounds and just wanted to get an understanding of how they compared girls of color, specifically black girls, to non-black girls. And the report showed from about the age of 5 to 14 that these individuals who completed this study felt that girls ages 5 to about 14, that black girls seemed older than their counterparts. They needed less nurturing, less protection, less support, less comfort, or more independent, and knew more about adult topics and knew more about sex. I bring this study up because if you think about it, this was, like I said, this was a study that was completed from individuals from various backgrounds. So when this young lady presents to the Department of Children and Family Services or Child and Family Services, if it presents to a SANE nurse trying to get for a forensic medical exam, advocates, law enforcement, what is the response? Do we respond the same to these young girls, or do we respond differently because of their cultural background? It's just something to keep in mind. And again, this is from 5 to 14 years old. Once they got to about 14, it kind of tapered off that people sort of felt the same about them. Another report is that the same Georgetown Law School, they did another one, not law school, but the Georgetown Center on Poverty and Equity. They did another report, the Sex Abuse to Prison Pipeline, the Girls Story, Typically, we hear about education to prison pipeline for boys, but for girls, what we're seeing that the pipeline to prison for them is sex abuse. There's a high growing population of young girls of color entering the criminal justice system, and the mass majority of these individuals have sex abuse in their background. And of those ladies who have sex abuse in their background, there's a lot of them who have experienced human trafficking as well. For whatever reason, when these young ladies experience sexual violence and their trauma response, instead of being positioned into a place of seeking counseling or trauma services, these individuals are being pushed into a criminal justice system to deal with their trauma, and they're often re-victimized when they're inside of the criminal justice system. This report, for a lot of my advocates, I have them read this report within their first week or two of starting a job, just because it really highlights how we have to advocate for these youth, especially not just in the criminal justice system, when they're at school, when they're out in their community, because of the responses, and making sure that these individuals and professionals understand that their trauma, that the way they are behaving is a direct result of their trauma. So we really want to get to a point where we change the narrative and making sure that we are responding to all survivors in a trauma-informed manner, really understanding how culture impacts these individuals when they respond. So in changing the narrative, we want to get to a point where we're supporting all survivors, offender accountability is present, and then we can get to safer communities. I think for anybody, I'm not sure if whether you work in law enforcement, whether you work in advocacy, the forensic area, prosecutor's office, this is a goal. We all have the same goals. We want survivors to get support. We want offender accountability to take place. And at the end of the day, we want our communities to be safer. Regardless of which discipline, these are some of the goals that we have. And so I kind of asked you all this earlier about how a survivor's cultural identity or the past may impact them reporting sexual violence. But just to add on to it, we talked about the fear of the criminal justice system, that self-blame that kicks in, because a lot of times, especially with survivors of color, they're told you don't, in the black community, I'll say this, and I have been guilty of this as a parent, like if you do this, you're fast. Don't go there, you're going to get in trouble, this is going to happen to you. And when that happens, that self-blame kicks in tremendously, and that internalized oppression. The fear of not being believed, the intersectionality of race and gender plays a huge part in the reporting process, generational abuse, specifically for women of color. I've seen and sat and worked with families where when I'm working with the youth, I wind up having to work with the mom or the grandmother as well, because the victimization in the family has happened generation after generation. So many times when you have that mom that's in that room and she does not seem to be connecting, you might want to touch base with that parent afterwards one-on-one to see what's going on with them, how can you support them. They might disclose, and at that point in time, giving them a referral to the appropriate resources would be beneficial for the family as well. I mean, another thing that impacts the reporting process is our programs and our systems lack diversity. We need to do a better job within the Rape Crisis Center programs, within the SANE programs, within the criminal justice system of recruiting diverse candidates, so our communities, our programs, our agencies look like the community that we're serving. And I already talked about that interracial dynamics of victimization and how that can impact individuals coming forward to report. So how do you think you or your agency can assist with identifying and eliminating these barriers for individuals? This is a question I'm putting out there to you all. What are some things that you think you or your agency can do to eliminate these barriers for people? Hire culturally competent staff, hire staff that's reflective of the community, Include survivors, yes, include survivors in your agency planning. Training. Having people that can speak multiple languages in the agency. Consider culture, race, and color and service delivery and advertisement. You know, I'm going to pause on that one because I think that is really important. How is your agency advertising? What does your agency website look like? What do the brochures look like that you pass out and give to survivors once you get to speak with them? Are they reflective of them? Will those survivors see themselves in that material? That's extremely important. A lot of people are saying education and training is the key. Being survivor-led, absolutely. Partnering with organizations that can actually help, like the Racial Equity Institution, that can come in and help you understand the equity issues within different races. Do some cross-team training, especially within your SARTs. Yes. So we talked about that, acknowledging the intersectionality of victimization, especially if you put sexual orientation, gender, class, language, abilities, differing abilities on top of it, finding ways to understand those different intersectionalities and how they play a part. Perpetrators will use the culture against the individual to perpetrate. And what I mean by that is we have some communities in my hometown where sexual assault happens at a high rate. And I am a firm believer that individuals know that they can go into those communities and victimize individuals without getting caught because of the low response from not just law enforcement, but from systems as a whole, from nonprofit organizations, from law enforcement, and then from the community in and of itself. Identify the community leaders. Who's the gatekeeper in this community? Who can you go and build a relationship with in that community to help open the doors for you? Because typically the gatekeepers in the community are the individuals that's going to help establish a trusting relationship and get you all connected. Be proactive in the relationship building. Typically we show up after something has happened and try to build relationships and work. But if we really show up in the communities where we know we need to establish a better relationship with, finding somebody to partner with for community events, to bring awareness about the services of your organization, all of these different things will be helpful. Someone in the chat comment mentioned the marketing material, how it should be diverse, looking not only in print, but what you have on your social media, your websites. And then also understand that some people just might not want the traditional support systems, or they might not utilize those. They may utilize systems that are completely different for them within their own communities. With your staff, definitely host and attend implicit bias trainings. We all have some form of biases that we carry along with us. We need to understand those biases and what they mean, and also understand how to depower those biases when they pop up. Are we making decisions that are not in the best interest of the individuals that we are trying to help? And then look at your policies and see how does your policies, how might they impact survivors of colors from coming forward or even disclosing information? Some other things we could do is definitely make sure we explain our role in the process and the limitations of our roles. People have ideals about, especially law and order. I don't think law and order has really helped many survivors. People think that they report, there's an arrest, and the case is all wrapped up within 45 minutes. When we know some of these cases can take 3, 6 months, or even a year to actually come to a reality of closure in the system. And then if a victim disengages, or recants, I think we need to really understand that sometimes victims disengage for safety reasons and not because it didn't happen. And when they disengage, it's so important that you're connecting people to advocates. Advocates are your individuals who will help you in this process and make sure that, you know, victims are staying engaged, they're staying connected, they're accessing resources that's available to them, and being that middle person if this individual does not trust the system, they can help be the person that can be the liaison between the two. And then really think about safety concerns within the community for that survivor. One of the things that you got to do through relationship building, what we did, we have our program Hogar Consuelo, which is dedicated to the Hispanic community. We created an advisory board for that community, and also we have just created our advisory board for the African American community. Those are two populations that we were not serving to the standard in which we want to serve, and we want to make sure that we were serving them appropriately and also making sure that they knew that we wanted to build relationships with them. So by creating a community advisory board, we did it off of the healthcare model where we are in the community, we meet monthly, we have members from the community at various levels, various backgrounds, individuals who may be educated, not educated, just age-wise, male, female, bringing these individuals together, because the worst thing you could do is go out in the community and try to do something without having input from the community. So we created these advisory boards, and we have been able to get into doors where we were never able to. They give us access to programs, events, and one of the things is this is that relationship building. They're going back to the community and saying, hey, this agency is really trying. They are working to make sure that they are getting it correct. And you won't have as many hiccups along the way. Talk about that being present. And then address past conflicts or trauma that may be present. It's okay to say, hey, yes, we got this wrong, but we're trying to do it better. And be transparent. If your organization is going through the process of change, be transparent with that change. Let the community know, hey, we are doing trainings around diversity. We are building relationships with the community. We are trying to do this. I think that being transparent is something that sometimes we kind of keep close to our chest because we don't want people to know we have been doing things wrong. But when you're transparent, it allows people to see that you're trying to get it correct. Be willing to listen and learn. Sometimes we are so quick to listen to respond and not listen to understand. When you start engaging with the community on this relationship building, we need to practice silence. And because of that, we want people to have space where they're being heard, but we're so quick to defend ourselves. I will raise my hand and say that has been me in the past, definitely. But now what we need to do is listen. And when we're listening, we're able to really understand how some of the past mistakes have impacted the community, and we could do better the next go-around. So what happens when we don't incorporate cultural humility into our practices? There's lower reporting. People tend not to come forward. Again, I talked about the word of mouth in communities. They will say, hey, this happened to me, and I reported, and I had a horrible experience. And next thing you know, they're going to tell somebody else, and that is just going to keep trickling down, and you will see lower reporting. The lack of trust in the systems and with service providers, what happened, that will be present. Victims will continue to disengage from the system for multiple reasons. And then you have lower offender accountability and increased victimization taking place. The Begun Center here at Case Western Reserve did a research survey study from our Untested Sexual Kit initiative here, and what they found out was that of 243 sexual assaults, 51% were tied to serial offenders. 74% of all serial offenders had at least one prior felony arrest, and 95% had an additional arrest post-victimization. And I bring this up to say is that if we do not find a way how we can work with survivors of all populations, what we're doing is increasing crime in our communities. The reason why the mass majority of our sex offenders from the untested kit were sent to prison wasn't because of rape. They were in prison because they stole something for somebody, they physically assaulted another person, they commit other crimes outside of sexual assault. So when you do not fully investigate, when you do not fully advocate for somebody as an advocate or prosecute a case to the fullest, you're not only disregarding the fact that that offender sexually assaults the victim that's in front of you, you're disregarding the fact that this individual is going to offend again, again, and again. We kind of talked about this a little bit, helping agencies achieve reform to get to that safer communities, offender accountability. One of the things I will also say, if you have a sexual assault response team or if you don't have one, create one. The multidisciplinary team is a great way for accountability amongst all individuals who are responding to survivors of sexual violence. And through this, we are able to identify biases in our own programs. We are able to identify where there are ways that we can do things a lot better. And we also are able to give ourselves high fives and gold stars and say, we are really doing well in this area. Let's focus over here. And then I also challenge you all to digest the data. One of the things we really need to do is look at how many sexual assault kits in our community were performed, how many of those kits were tested, how many reports, how many went forward to prosecution. Look at the data, and I'm just not talking about those numbers, but digest the data, the demographics that's connected to the data, and then see where are areas that we are not getting as well. So we are at the end of the presentation, and I am going to welcome questions that you all have at this point in time.
All right, thank you, Teresa. That was amazing. We had so many fantastic comments from our audience members. I think there were 10 or 12 in a row saying that your talk should be put into an entire conference. So thank you so much for your presentation and the information. We are going to jump right into the questions because we do have quite a few. The first came in during your Native American talk at the beginning, asking what are some of the reasons that the U.S. attorneys declined to prosecute the sexual assault cases by non-Native perpetrators?
Some of the reasons, I believe some of the reasons are what we talked about, the fact that individuals reported lack of support systems for those individuals in place, and a lot of times those individuals were blamed for their own victimization, and the jurisdictional issues that continuously surface with regards to when Native Americans experience violence, period. There's a report, I will send it to you to link later, that has the full report with regards to why the U.S. attorneys were declining at a high rate Native American women's victimization.
Okay. Before we move on to the next question, I just wanted to make sure that the audience sees there on your screen. We do have Ms. Stafford's contact information there, as well as her email and phone number. She was gracious enough to give that out to the audience today, so please make sure you take that down before you do leave. Next question we have that came in is asking, are there any statistics or references relating to Arab Americans, and are they also considered according to this classification?
Yes, there's some information, but to be honest, because the reporting there is extremely low as well, there's not a lot of information that I have found with regards to Arab Americans.
All right. Next question we have is, how do advocates, crisis centers, and other respondents work with communities of color that have cultural and religious practices that do not find domestic assault and abuse as a part of their culture and religious beliefs, and not as something that is illegal or wrong?
And that's where the education piece come in, and you have to do it very slowly. We can't going into communities and just saying you are wrong. This is not the correct way. This is the law. Sometimes that right there is the wrong way to go, and it would shut the individual completely down. You have to start off in very small steps and having that conversation with communities or organizations whose practices and beliefs are completely different from what we see as a whole as a society. And part of that could be just with saying, hey, we want to come in and have a conversation about prevention. or healthy relationships. But start real small before you go into the meat of what you want to say. We can't change people in one conversation. It has to be a build-up.
All right. Next question we have that came from Barbara. She's asking, are there any tips for encouraging Hispanic and Latino men to report? This is a cultural difference that I see frequently. They do not report any allegations or sexual abuse or harassment.
It is extremely low for that population. There are some organizations that are doing some really great work. If there's an organization in your community that has a relationship with the Hispanic community, I would say start there. One of the things that our outreach person, our manager with the Hogarth Consuelo program, she went to the food bank. She goes to places that are doing job training, giving people job training skills. She goes in there and have an opportunity to kind of just reach and start having a conversation about what sexual violence is, what are the resources in the community. If you need help, here's who you can go to. She shows up at the daycare centers or places where the women are gathered to speak with them. We have went inside of some of our public school systems have classrooms that are dedicated to Hispanic individuals who may be new to the community, who may not speak English. She's actually inside of those classrooms actually talking to the youth as well, giving them information about healthy relationships.
Just to point out real quick, when
Start early. Start with
Oh, I apologize, Ms. Stafford, if you want to continue.
No, I was just saying that earlier, if you could start speaking to the youth about this topic, it would help out a whole lot. Sometimes the generational difference can help. Sometimes you have a generation that is more in tune to this conversation and more open to having a conversation around sexual violence. And if you can talk to those individuals, and hopefully they'll help bring in other individuals. But just have to think about the generation differences as well in some of these communities.
And just to touch on that, we did have a comment from Juanita saying that starting to build relationships early on is key. We do prevention work in the schools, which gives us the opportunity to reach and share information with girls of color, which is then translated into their parents receiving services.
Absolutely. Yes, Juanita.
All right, we've got a couple of comments we'll run through. Danielle said, thank you for mentioning the piece about historical trauma and rape, such as slavery in the Jim Crow era. That is something that is not often or even touched on. And then our next question is, do you have any statistics available for non-POC sexual assaults to compare to assaults conducted against POC?
Could you repeat
do you have
that, please?
statistics available for non-persons of color sexual assaults to compare to the assaults conducted against persons of color?
Yes, my last slide has a couple different links with regards to some data around sexual violence for all survivors.
Okay. Next question we have is, are there any studies on sexual assault victims of color who are incarcerated or institutionalized who unfortunately can be victimized?
Yes, Just Detention has a lot of information around survivors who are incarcerated with regard to their victimization of survivors of color and non-survivors of color as well. Just Detention is one of the national organizations that address Prison Rape Elimination Act.
All right. As you will see there in the chat pod, as Julian has stated, the slides from today's presentation will be available for download directly after the Q&A during the closing. So you'll be able to download those before you leave today. So please stick with us. Ms. Stafford has been gracious enough to grant us a few more minutes of her time, so we will probably run over just because we do have so many great questions to get through. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next. Is there information about how quickly rape cases are investigated in cases involving white women and women of color in general?
I don't know if there's any data out there about that. I can speak from my experiences and what I've seen in the cases I've worked and by supervising a team of advocates for over the last 10 years. I can definitely say I've seen a difference in how systems respond to survivors based on several factors: race, whether they are addicted to drugs or not, their mental health issues, class. I could just see that some entities respond differently depending on who that survivor is and how they present themselves. That's my anecdotal status. I don't have like the hardcore data for that, but I definitely have seen a difference. We had a case here in Cleveland a few years ago where a young lady was sexually assaulted while she was jogging early in the morning. The way the system responded to her was fantastic. They were able to get out there, canvass that neighborhood, and find that person who sexually assaulted her in a matter of days. This same perpetrator in another side of our community climbed into a woman's house about a year or so earlier, sexually assaulted her. That same victim reported, did everything, went to the hospital. That case went cold. There was no canvass in the neighborhood. There was no response with a semi-quasi task force created, and the only difference between those two individuals was race. I see how people respond differently when I'm sitting in multidisciplinary teams with regards to human trafficking, how people will use certain words to describe certain victims as being manipulative, being aggressive, families being so involved in systems, and then when you hear it for another person that this child is trying to find ways to survive, that this individual is connected to certain services. I mean, it's just the tone that people use depending on what the survivor looks like. That is really what I've been noticing.
All right. Just a quick information out to the audience. I'm asking if audio will be available. We are all archiving this as we do with all of our webinars. So we will be turning this around into one of our archival versions that will be available for registration hopefully by the beginning of next week. So we will be sending out an email to everyone that has registered so that you will have access to the archival not only for your benefit, but also you can pass this along to any colleagues that might have missed today's live event. So the next question we have is, I live in Nebraska, which is the largest and fastest growing state where human trafficking is taking place. Everything I learned or watched about human trafficking is about white women. Do you think that this is discriminatory, or has it to do with communities of color not actually reporting the crimes?
Wow. I think that is, again, who do we care about as a society? Who gets attention and who doesn't get attention? What we're definitely seeing here and in other communities, young girls of color are going missing at an extremely high rate. Native American women are going missing at an extremely high rate. It's just who rises to the attention of the media? Who deserves that attention? Do we believe that these individuals can be trafficked? Are they doing it in themselves? I think it's the narrative and who gets to tell the story. What we definitely are seeing is that individuals of all backgrounds are being trafficked. Definitely know that young girls of color are being trafficked at an extremely high rate. But what we're seeing is that they're not being recovered as soon. Is anybody looking for them? You had Washington, Cleveland, and I want to say up in the Baltimore area had over the news this year about all of the young girls of color that were missing in their communities, and is that being addressed? And people are quickly say these young ladies are running away. And this is a whole different presentation than with human trafficking. Are they running away, or are they leaving on their own accord? But at the end of the day, what we're learning is a lot of times that these traffickers are telling them they can't stay away long, that they must report back to them, or they're going to cause harm to their families. So on the surface, it looked like they ran away, but in reality, they left home to protect home. So the attention is just not there for some of these survivors that are trafficked.
Okay, kind of sticking on the human trafficking. I know it can be a completely whole another webinar in itself, but we did have Someone that asked, we have a major problem with human trafficking in Greece and the illegal immigration. The government doesn't seem to understand the implications. What can we propose to assist with legislation changes in the practice?
I think that's a larger question for a different webinar, but I definitely think we need to be in contact with our legislators and really have them understand the impact of when people are victimized and they are not able to come forward because of the fear of deportation, what that truly means. That means that individuals will still commit crimes, and they're not going to just commit crimes to individuals that are not here legally. They're going to commit crimes against the whole community as well. It's a big education piece.
Okay. Next question is from Chandra. She's asking, how do we get women of color interested in these different agencies? I know that you had touched on it quite a bit, but if there's anything else that we need to elaborate on for our audience.
Well, Sandra, one of the things that we have here in Ohio is some of the state sexual assault coalitions have across the country is a Women of Color Caucus. I think we have to be able to make sure that these organizations, some of our organizations in our communities have a bad rep for servicing women of color. So if they have a bad rep for servicing them, most women of color are not going to go work for those organizations. So we have to step back and build better relationships. And then if your state does have a Women of Color Caucus, look to that caucus to help mentor and bring more women of color into the field. That is definitely one of the things that I've been doing over the years, is making sure that we are able to bring these women of color into the field and also make sure they have the tools that they need so they can stay into the field. But we also have to make sure that organizations are ready to accept them in, that they understand instead of saying, oh, this person isn't a fit with our organization, this person is going to bring a cultural add to your organization. And that's a lot of things that we have to shift organizations from how they view individuals that may be different from them. If you think about the history of the movement, of the Rape Crisis Center movement, when people say that it started like in 1974 when the Rape Crisis Center was first built, when one of the first Rape Crisis Centers was established, I always get a giggle out of that because our history really started way back with Sojourner Truth, with Ida B. Wells. It started back with Rosa Parks before she was on the bus, Montgomery bus boycott for the NAACP. She was an advocate. She was going out investigating rapes of women of color and drawing attention to that. So we really have to understand that history and then what happened in the movement when women of color got pushed out of the movement, but really open the doors and bring them back in. Because as long as we don't have women of color in this movement at leadership levels across organizations, we will still see organizations not being able to fully respond and meet the needs of survivors of color.
All right. Next question we have comes from Sharon. She's asking in regards to education, how do we do this with folks who are younger? We can be more proactive, but how do we have these trainings at very young ages?
Hire young folks in your organization. Hire people from various backgrounds in the organizations and get into the schools, the PTO, PTA programs. We have a full prevention program where we're inside schools, inside rec centers, having these conversations about healthy dating relationships. Bullying, it can start talking to youth at a very young age about bullying and then move it up a step for every age group. I think the earlier you have these conversations, the better. The other thing is really having going to like Moms First or WIC programs and speaking with the parents that connected those programs. One of the things I go out and talk to parents about in the past was like making sure your kids know the appropriate body parts, not naming their vagina a cute little name because when they get ready to disclose, they may not have the terminology to disclose appropriately. Making sure they understand who can touch what, who's not supposed to touch certain places. I think we need to really make sure parents are equipped and then also making sure the youth are equipped at the same time.
And Carmen just put in a very interesting and good comment that she saw the reaction between the girls of color and the others with the recent Olympic scandal.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, we saw that even in the Me Too with Harvey Weinstein. all the women that were brave enough to come forward to talk about their victimization with him, it's only one of those women that he said that he called out and said, I didn't sexually assault her, I didn't do nothing. And that was the one African-American female that came forward, Lupita.
And you just segued into our next question. So have you noticed an increase of survivors of color reporting or coming in for services, etc., since the Me Too movement?
I have not noticed it in my organization specifically, no. I think that some of our prevention people who are in some of our inner city schools, they have said when they talk about the Me Too movement, some of them haven't even connected it to them. And when you look at the Me Too movement, what we see in media, it's really not reflective of people of color at all, even though it was started by Tarana Burke, a woman of color, specifically for young girls of color when she was doing some work in a summer camp. But I don't think as a whole that some of our communities have connected that Me Too movement actually started and was for them.
All right, we have time for a few more questions. How do you address the stigma of silence in a culturally responsive way with communities of color?
That's a really good question, Claudia. I think we have to understand that when, and talk about when people remain silent, what's the long-term impact? Survivors are not accessing services. What we know is that survivors of sexual violence are more likely to be involved in drugs, more likely to have unhealthy coping skills, suicide ideation. I think we have to really have those hardcore conversations. What happens when individuals stay silent? And on the other end of that, when individuals stay silent and for various reasons, because sometimes it may be in their best interest to stay silent, though, but for when they do stay silent, the victimization that can continue happening. The perpetrator will, most perpetrators sexually assault more than one time. It's not that perpetration will continue forward.
All right. Next question we have is asking, what can college campuses do better to support survivors of color and eliminate barriers?
I think understanding, looking at your bystander intervention programs and really looking at them and seeing are they culturally humility, does that incorporated, is it cultural responsiveness to all survivors on campus? Also connecting individuals and partnering with non-government organizations such as your Rape Crisis Center programs in your communities, so survivors of colors may be able to go to a confidential resource and have access to services, basis accessing those services on campus, because there's an extreme fear if they do come forward on a college campus that the community, because it's so small, that the community will find out. So really finding a way for those individuals to have access to services that are really private.
All right. Next question we have came from Charmaine. She's asking, have you any experiences with sexual abuse in religious settings with survivors of color?
Yes, I have worked a few cases where an individual or pastors or a cult-ish like church where some sexual victimization was taking place. I do work with specifically black churches, religious organizations around their responsibilities with regards to supporting survivors when they come forward, and also understanding that from a religious perspective that faith without works, that the church has their responsibility, but also a responsibility of if they're a mandated reporter, if it's a minor, and putting things in place in the church's policies to protect the congregation, and also making sure that the church understands their responsibility to their congregation. I was just working with another church, and it actually wasn't with regards to a survivor of color, where they had an individual that was sexually harassing parishioners and kissed a young lady without consent. And they knew some things were going on for a period of time, and had to really talk to them about their responsibility to protect their congregation. But we see a lot of times within the African American church that I one of the cases that I worked on in the past, it was really shocking to me that the pastor pled guilty, went to prison, and he remained the pastor. And that's something that I don't know. I could never fix that when the church allows that to happen.
All right, I think we got time for two more questions. Next one we have comes from Crystal. Many times drug use becomes a way for victims to deal with their traumas. How is this issue addressed when trying to address substance abuse or trauma first?
Yeah, we see that a lot of times where people are forced into drug treatment or forced into going to a rape crisis center or seeking services for counseling. I think you have to address both of them sort of at the same time. You can't address the drug use without addressing the reason why that individual is using drugs. We actually have a couple counselors here at my agency that are really well equipped to understand trauma and addiction. So they work with our clients that might have dual diagnosis at the same time. Really have to make people understand that sometimes the drugs are being used so they can cope with the traumas. And when you take away the drugs, we have to put healthy coping mechanisms in place for that individual to survive. And when you just take their way that they have been using without helping them identify other methods to cope that are more healthier, you could actually be causing more damage.
All right, so we have a couple of questions left. I'm going to try to roll them all up into one. They kind of are along the same theme. So Athena's asking, we have a problem with gypsy girls who appear in the system pregnant and married as children. They do not attend school and they keep out of the community in general, but intermarry within their own gypsy communities. How do we break the chain of sexual abuse in those girls? How do you break the chain of sexual abuse in any culture, religion, or anything along those lines? Such as how do you suggest churches that are very set in their ways that refuse to accept those conversations, or different cultures such as Indian Americans, giving that the rape culture in India is so pervasive? What are some things that can be done to kind of break that epidemic cycle?
I think this is where having a diverse staff come in play, where individuals from those communities are able to actually speak to those communities, finding an ally, somebody that is able to actually speak to the community that the community trusts to help have those conversations early. Again, these are not conversations that only will take place one time. I think first of all, you have to start building a relationship, get individuals to trust you, and not just trust you to have a conversation about sexual violence, but just trust that when you show up, you're going to respect them in their space. And when you start having that trust there, it's a little bit easier to have in some more complicated conversations.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Stafford. We did run over a little bit, but I think it was worth it. This was a fantastic presentation. I think if you were standing in front of the live audience, you would have a standing ovation right now. So thank you very much for your time and your research and everything that you have done for the community.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming today.
All right, as mentioned, we do have today's slide deck in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen that you are able to download before you leave. Simply click on the file name and then click the download files button, and you will be able to download that directly. I will leave the room open for a few minutes so that everybody has a chance to access that. As with all of our webinars, we do like to thank our subject matter expert first and foremost, so thank you very much, Ms. Stafford, for your presentation and your research. And obviously, we would also like to thank our audience members for joining us today. These webinars are simply not possible without your attendance and your support. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Before you do leave, we always ask that you participate in our short survey. You'll find it there in the middle of your closing slides. Simply click the word "Here," and that will open up a window with our feedback survey in it. Your feedback about our webinars is vital information that we always try to use to make sure that we are providing you the best webinar experience, and also to adjust any content and the way we disseminate that information out to you, our audience. So if you would take a few moments to do that, we would greatly appreciate it. As with all of our webinars, we have recorded this and we will be converting it into our archival version. So please check out your email over the next few days. We'll be sending an email out to everyone that did register with the archival registration link. You will also see there in your chat pod, Julian is plugging some of our social media outlets, such as Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. We do also have our website as well as our podcast. We are in our 5th season for our Forensic Center of Excellence podcast, so make sure to subscribe to that. A lot of great podcasts are going on there. We update a new one almost every week. And then also check out our website for all of our at no cost webinar offerings to you, our forensic science community. Again, thank you, Ms. Stafford, for your presentation. Thank you to all of our audience members for joining us, and we look forward to seeing everyone in our next event. We hope everyone has a great afternoon.